to get into this, find someone in the project who's good at finance or who's organized and who can help, take care of those kinds of things. Any questions on the careers that I covered so far? How do I contribute to open source? I think I gave a little bit of a kind of an example of what I do. I run the open source office at SanDisk, and I talk about it in these bubbles. One, there's a lot of education that traditional companies, like hardware companies, need. Inside a lot of companies, you still need a lot of education on why should we get involved in open source? What is the business of open source? How do we make money in open source? How should we get involved? Which projects should we get involved in? And so on and so forth. So I do a lot of internal education. And then I do some external education in terms of here's what SanDisk is and what projects we are interested in, what we can do and what we can contribute, to the community. The second area is I encourage engineers at the company who are involved in open source projects to contribute to open source. And I always say to them, code is more powerful than PowerPoints, right? Which is what Linus says. And they say, why? Why should we contribute? Because, my competitors will see it, they'll use it. And we always say contribution gives you a seat at the table. You can't keep going to a lunch buffet at your uncle's house and eating from the table but never taking a dish to share with everybody. And if you're going to eat, you're going to bring something with you. But more importantly, that's how we consume a lot of open source at SanDisk. So we should give back. And so that's the philosophy that we've been using. And collaboration, collaborating with other companies, other communities, whether it's at OpenStack or Linux Foundation or Scale, I encourage that, and I keep track of, which organizations we should be getting involved in and how to get involved. Competency, so we are trying also very hard to build skill sets inside the company. How do you contribute? How do you use GitHub? How do you contribute to open source? How do you work in open source? How do you conduct yourself in a community so that you are not offending people? Because there is an art to how you work with different communities. Compliance is another aspect of my job, which is making sure that at all times we are listening to the community. We are abiding by the obligations of licenses. And last but not the least, I do this a lot, which is speak at conferences. I do general communication on open source and open source offices, but I also encourage our company and team to go out and talk about what we do and what open source is about. Because if all of us evangelize, all of us communicate, the knowledge level goes up, and everybody's use of open source goes up. And just to wrap it all up, when I talked to these 7 women that I showcased, and the reason I showcased them also is because very often we don't really highlight the other contributions that happen in open source, and there are a lot of contributions being made by women in open source. So that was also part of my, talk. And when I talk to them, they all say they love open source. They're in it because it's collaborative, it's rebellious, it's got this, element of I'll show you. And it's innovative, it's open and transparent, all these things that all of us here love about open source, that you can inspect code, you can contribute code, you can manage your own destiny. But they also say that it's hard for new people to get involved because there's no one single path to get involved. Every project is different. Communication tools can be intimidating. IRC or Slack or whatever, and every project has their own communication tool, and until you master that tool, sometimes you feel like a newbie and you don't want to talk, or you can't get a word in edgewise. Sometimes you don't get involved because you just have a fear and you're ignorant about open source, and so until you get educated, you don't know how to. And so part of my talk was to say that there are various ways to get involved, not just in code, and then through those paths you can start getting more and more involved in open source coding or projects, so that it's not so intimidating. There's a lot of projects which are it's either all or nothing. There's no small project you can get involved or a low-hanging fruit, such as a 2-day worth of documentation that you need to do, or come and help us at this event and help us in the booth. Scale does a fantastic job, I think, of giving volunteers a chance to get involved and see the culture of open source. And Anne said to me, there's no real good training for open source except attending conferences, I think, like this, which says to you, this is the way you start contributing a patch, or this is the way you get on IRC, or this is the way you market open source. And so it becomes very intimidating. So I asked them, what's the best way for people to get involved? I think you saw a number of examples throughout those 7 stories that I told you. The best way I got involved was attending conferences. And most conferences, like Scale, do a beginner session, and it's a great way for beginners to kind of understand what to do and which project to pick. The other thing people say is pick a project that interests you and then get involved. So if you're a legal person, maybe join OpenChain. If you are a documentation person, maybe there's a project that badly needs help, or you've used the project and so you know how it works, and so maybe you can contribute documentation there. You can volunteer and share your strengths with them. Someone once said, design a T-shirt. If you're a designer, you say, hey, can I design a T-shirt for you guys? It's free of charge. I want to get involved. Or write a blog, or write a grant for them so that they can submit money. This one is something that people everywhere I went to said, could people please submit bug reports? We would love to get bug reports from people, and to fix a documentation or a bug, and present at a conference. If you're a user of a technology, if you use Drupal, or if you use Python or something, talk about it as a user. Get involved. One of the questions I think Andrea has asked me also, she said, aren't these conferences very technical, so do I have to be technical in order to give a talk? And I said, no. There are always tracks for mentoring. There are tracks for business of open source. There are beginner tracks. Get involved. Give a talk at some of those tracks. So you don't have to be an expert at that particular project to give a talk. You can give a talk on all of these different areas. And seek a mentor. You can always, people are so helpful. You can reach out and say, can you please help me? How do I get involved in this? Or how do I make a contribution? Or how do I write a patch? But I think people also want you to have done your homework and checked out what to do before you just, go out and say, can you help me, right? At least form your question and ask it in a way that people are willing to help you. Some ideas for those who are running projects so that you can welcome new people. Appreciate people. I think this came from Deb sitting in the audience. And show them that they're important. Sometimes we don't stop and thank people who have helped us, or who made a patch contribution, or who've done some documentation work for us. Every project, I think, should make time to bring in new people with varying capacities and time. And maybe you have projects which require 1 day of time, or there's another project which requires 1 day a week for the next 6 months. So if you have that kind of a classification, then it's easier to bring in new people who say, hey, I have 1 day a week I can contribute to open source. What can I do? Make projects friendly. Make the communication tools friendly. Have starter projects or low-hanging fruit projects. I started getting involved in OpenStack recently, and I was intimidated by IRC and other tools that they were using. I had to go learn a wiki, I had to go do this, I had to go do that, and it kind of stopped me from really getting involved. And then someone said, "Hey, we'll do a class on, basics of IRC or basics of this and basics of that," and that was huge because that made me feel so much more comfortable, and I started, getting more and more involved, and I was able to contribute. Make a special effort to have a section of the conference for new people, and offer scholarships like Outreachy does. And I think this conference does a great job of having a kids track and lots of other new people track. And project members at the booth itself. We used to do this a lot with Yocto. If you have engineers at the booth, if you have people who have been working on the project, very often people feel less intimidated about the project. So they kind of associate the face with the person, and it's not just an IRC handle. You can actually go talk to them, you can understand the project, and you feel more compelled to contribute to the project. The bottom line is we really need to do more open source education in schools, and I've been talking to a couple of mentors here who work with schools, and it's such a great way for students to get involved in learning coding and getting involved in projects and contributing, because companies like Facebook, companies like Google look at your GitHub repository, look at your resume as Git, and what kind of projects do you have there, and that's how they recruit. Have you contributed to the projects that they've been working on? Have you made, because that's the proof is in the code, and in other areas as well, whether it's community management, etc. So students, there's no barrier to entry. They can get involved in that area, but I think they need a lot of mentors and people who can explain how to get involved. So I'm glad to see the students here. I've got some resources here. Open Hatch does a fantastic job of educating students and getting involved. Open Innovation Network, which Deb is a part of, OpenStack, Linux Foundation, opensource.org, which is the group that publishes a lot of articles. You can self-publish there. Linux.com is also another place for how-tos and articles. Outreachy gives scholarships to people to get involved in Linux and Linux open source, and the magazine. I'll add some more to this, and the organization will publish some of this as well. So just want to wrap it up and say, open source, we need to grow. It was interesting that Shuttleworth said, our kids will use machines to code. I don't think so. I think it'll continue to be, we need coders, we need people who document, we need people who are engaged and who help people come on board and work with the community. We need to recognize the contributions of non-coders. Do you guys all agree that these roles are really important for the success of an open source project? Did I miss any other role that we should outline and we should include? Great question. So testing is a very, very important role as well. And in fact, you can volunteer as a tester. You can write test scripts. You can, submit bugs. So testing is also an important role. And I need to do more research in that area and kind of put a page together. I think, correct. Yeah, I think it's somewhere between. The question was, where does it fit in? Is it in development? Is it in ops? I think it's somewhere in between. It's some of the developers do their own testing, but then you can have some independent testers do some testing as well. Yeah, that's an important role. And create an environment. If each and every one of us in all the projects that we work in and in open source in general create an environment to involve new people, then I think open source will continue to be vibrant and active and move on. Thank you. And I can take questions. Yes. The question was, what are the opportunities for translating documentation into, or project information into other languages? And that's a huge, huge area of help. When I put this together, someone came to me and said, we really, really need help in localizing and translating documentation as well as websites and other things into other languages. So I think there's a huge opportunity. I would say approach a project that you're interested in and say, is there any way I can help? I can do this language or I can do this language. Anyone else have an answer for that? Yes. Yeah. POOTLE.com or .org? Thank you. So Deb's answer was POOTLE.org is a site that helps you contribute from a translation perspective and makes it easier to do translation for projects. Yes. And the question was, is there a way to convert users into contributors and to get them more involved in projects and not just to be a user and kind of depend upon the project for everything? The best examples I heard from the talks, the people that I talked to was give them a chance to talk about the project and how they use it and what works for them. So make them a hero and give them a first as an opportunity to talk, and then maybe to submit bug reports and patches. Bug reports are easy because everybody can submit that, and then maybe get them involved in. So how would you solve this problem? And make them a part of the solution so they can submit a patch for that bug instead of just doing the bug. I know some of the groups we are involved in, like CEF, the CEF community, asks users to be part of their advisory board and gets them involved in roadmap planning and in features and functions that need to come next. So they become, part of the solution rather than being just in the audience as a user only. Any other suggestions from the audience? Yes. Yes. Which exactly right. Ask them to verify the documentation. Ask them to submit, reports on the documentation, on the bugs, on new features. Ask them to speak at your event. Most of us are very ego-driven. We love being on the stage. So if someone says, "Can you come speak?" we'll go speak. And I'll say, "Oh yeah, I'm a Uber user, so I can go talk about how I use it or my use case." Does that make sense? Any other suggestions on how to convert users into contributors to become more active in the project? Yes. That's a great idea, Deb. And I think most websites don't kind of make it easy for you to understand what role you can play. So if there's even a page where you can say, we're looking for this, this, and this, and this. You know, if you have so many hours, or if you have this skill set, can you please get involved? Make it dead simple to get involved is what you're saying, and so that people can start contributing. Otherwise, we look at websites and then we say, what can I do here? And you just don't know what role you can play. Yes. Yeah, meetups are, the question is, do people do meetups and invite people to come try? Yeah, yeah, to get users more involved. I think that's a great idea. What we as a user of Ceph do is we often volunteer our facility for a Ceph meetup or Ceph group. So your users can also, you can assign them the task, to your point, of organizing a meetup or doing it on their facility so that they can get involved and they can be part of the project from that perspective. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you so much for coming, and I appreciate your time.